Welcome everyone to our November Oxfam Live event. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Atiya Hirji and I work in community fundraising here at Oxfam Canada. Today I will be moderating our discussion on water, sanitation, and hygiene as we explore just how essential and life-saving proper sanitation can be. I would like to start our discussion with a land acknowledgement to recognize the traditional Indigenous territory we find ourselves on. I am speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Given that this is a virtual event with people gathered from many territories, I would like to invite you to please take a moment and acknowledge the territory you are joining us from. Now, a few housekeeping items. A reminder that our discussion today will be recorded and shared with those that registered after the session. We would also like to hear from you in our Q&A portion of the program. So at any time, please feel free to add your questions into the Q&A chat, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, we have the pleasure of meeting and learning from Zaria Wong, Oxfam Canada's Humanitarian Program Officer. Zaria is a committed feminist and human rights advocate. Prior to joining Oxfam's humanitarian team, where she manages a portfolio of projects in emergency and refugee contexts, she worked in Myanmar responding to the Rohingya crisis. Over the last decade, Zaria has lived and gained professional experience in Canada, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mali, Myanmar, and Thailand. Whew. She has a master's degree in international law and human rights and an undergraduate degree in international development studies. Welcome, Zaria. So happy to be chatting with you today.
Great, thank you, Atiya.
So to start off, can you tell us more about Oxfam's WASH programming?
Yeah, sure. Like you mentioned, WASH stands for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene. When we talk about water, think about things like both the quality of the water and access to water. A good example of our programming would be drilling a borehole, which is basically a deep well that will provide water to those affected. So it could be refugees in a refugee camp. So we would drill it and then we would equip it on top to bring the water up to the surface. A good example for sanitation would be how we deal with our waste. So human waste, excreta, that could be in the form of building a latrine. So what we would do is we would work with communities. We would talk to different groups, for example, with women, with elderly or disabled, adolescent girls, and then we would really work to understand their needs and then take that into our design and build a latrine. That's one of the things that we've done most recently in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. And then for hygiene, this is more about the sort of practices that people take to maintain health and hygiene. So this could be a hand washing demonstration in a refugee camp. It's really important, especially in the current COVID situation. Or it could be door-to-door messaging in a context where people have low rates of literacy about risks with regards to drinking contaminated water, good hygiene practices, etc.
Great. Okay, thank you for giving us the lay of the land. There seems to be a lot that falls under WASH programming, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I just wanted to share the reason why we're actually talking about WASH today. And that's because World Toilet Day is coming up on November 19th. And this is an internationally recognized day to raise awareness and inspire action to tackle the global sanitation crisis. And so we'll touch more on that shortly. But first, sorry, I was hoping you could talk about Oxfam's WASH work in more detail. So my first question is, when does Oxfam implement WASH programming?
Yeah, so we actually implement in a various number of different types of contexts, but mostly when people are vulnerable to like WASH-related diseases, or there's a situation like displacement. So disease outbreaks like cholera or Ebola. We've worked in those. Natural disasters. So this is something that people might hear about more often. So if there's flooding going on, an earthquake, cyclones, there have been a number of hurricanes. And then also in situations of like slow onset emergencies. So it might sound a bit funny because an emergency you think of usually as more rapid. But in the case of, for example, drought, it happens very slowly that you won't get rain for days and days. But then after a while, it will come to a point where it is critical and it is life-saving to have access to water. And then other newsworthy also would be like conflict kind of crisis situations, situations where we have fragile states. And then often it also comes to complex situations. So those are times when we have a mixture of all of those other situations I just mentioned combined. So if we have, for example, an urban slum, if there's a conflict going on in the country and then say a cyclone hits, you'll have just enhanced needs and much more risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that obviously highlights that in emergencies, that's when WASH becomes really important and why Oxfam is usually first on the ground. So why would you say does Oxfam Canada focus on WASH work in our humanitarian response? Why is that so essential?
Yeah, so it's related to human needs. In an emergency, the most important things that we need right away is water and sanitation, and that's along with food and shelter, of course. So without water, people will obviously die or they'll go in search of it. If we think about, say, a cyclone situation, it can be difficult to go in search of water. And you could also have people who are wounded or it's just hard to travel. In a conflict situation, there are security related risks. So we don't want people going out of their way and putting themselves at further risk.
Makes sense, of course. And given that we are Oxfam Canada and focus on work through a gendered lens, can you talk about maybe how gender comes into play with regards to our WASH work?
Sure. Like for me, like gender is a really crucial aspect of our work, and it's something that we need to place emphasis on, primarily because men and women have drastically different experiences in terms of their needs and in terms of like how they experience access to WASH. So for example, if we want to go to the washroom in a refugee camp, we'll need to access a latrine, and men might be perfectly comfortable accessing a latrine and it might be fine as per their standards, but women might face barriers that men don't. In fact, a few years back, Oxfam looked at a bunch of different contexts across different refugee programs, and the research showed that 40% of women weren't actually accessing the latrines that were provided to them. And then so what the researchers did is they looked at the different reasons why. So part of that was like not feeling comfortable being seen going to the toilet. So like kind of tied into privacy. Fear of sexual harassment and violence was also a major factor. Some latrines might not have locks on the doors. And so if you can't ensure your privacy and security when you're in there, you might not use it. Also in emergency situations, often the initial latrines are made out of like a kind of plastic sheeting. It's like tarps, like that same kind of fabric. So there will be a lot of like tears and rips, and people are afraid of like people peeping in. So related to their privacy like before. at nighttime. Sometimes it's to do with lighting. If it's a dark path to an unlit latrine, that has risks associated with it, especially in terms of like safety. Other issues could be related to things like vermin, so snakes and all those things that come out a little bit more at night. And then another one is cleanliness. So all of this kind of research that I'm speaking of led to what we call Sani tweaks at Oxfam. So it's basically just like best practices in sanitation. And at the core of that is consulting with people before even starting to build, say, a latrine. And then really talking to the users, so the people who would be frequenting that latrine, to find out like, what are their practices, like what do they prefer, like what should be the difference between the men's facilities and the women's, because in some cultures, like, it's unacceptable to have that kind of contact. You're not supposed to be in contact with people outside your family. Another thing that we kind of like, that I think about now, but that I didn't think about before I started this kind of work, is like, how do you manage like menstrual hygiene management in an emergency? Like, what do women and girls do in that respect? And then more to do with like elderly or people who are living with disabilities, like what are the kind of sitting constraints that the population might have? So like really asking all these questions and then listening and understanding what the users need, and then modifying the design that we had in mind to accommodate those. So getting the right lighting, getting the right door locks, accessibility, privacy, making sure like the door height is not too high so people can't peek underneath and see your ankles while you're in there. Maybe for tall people, which I am not, but like making sure the wall height is high enough so they can't see you when you're going to the washroom. I understand this is something that is awkward for men. I wouldn't know. And then adaptations for elderly or disabled. So it could be like a wall grip if it makes it easier to get up or down. Sanitary pad, like washing stations and drying racks and this kind of thing, if it's reuse that the people are doing, or a disposal place. And then regular things like hand washing. So then bringing that back and then consulting with people again. One of the core components of our programming would be to have those kind of feedback mechanisms in place. So when people are actually using a latrine, they can say, hey, like, this isn't working. We need it adjusted a certain way, and then we can respond to that to make it really user-friendly, so that our facilities are used and that there are less health risks involved. So this all relates back to gender mainstreaming and not making assumptions about like the kind of impacts that a disaster will have on women and that they're the same as men. So just really understanding the needs of women and girls as well as men and boys, and really addressing them in what we do.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And now that you outlined some real life examples, it really makes it clear that there's so many nuances that you sometimes don't consider. So I really like that the users are involved in that conversation, and that assessment is done first and foremost. And it's obviously clear that a lack of proper sanitation is a major public health issue, and can contribute to the spread of deadly disease. So that being said, given what's happening with COVID-19 right now, do you find that brings about new WASH-related issues?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that like WASH-related issues are enhanced with COVID. They're dealing with fairly similar things, but I guess the context is a bit more difficult. So what we know about COVID-19, of course, is that like people who have weakened immune systems are more at risk, and it impacts them more severely. And then of course in like a refugee camp or other type of crisis, we have people that are more packed together. They're already having like more limited access to basic needs. So shelters are closer together. There's a higher population density. So you might have to line up for a few hours, say, to get some water, and it's difficult to ensure that physical distancing in that kind of a context. But I suppose that's kind of similar to some of the situations we have here. What they do is, like, for example, draw those lines on the floor to help people remember to keep their distance. And that's something that we do here in the grocery store. So like it's different, but you can tie it easily back to the things that we experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I just thought of another like example that I find really interesting. So I did mention before that we do like hygiene promotion messaging, and I know like here we would have messages about COVID on TV or whatnot, but of course you don't have TVs going everywhere in a refugee camp. So we used to do them through community-based volunteers who would go like door to door and talk to people. This is mainly because of lower literacy rates. So obviously in COVID, we can't do that. So what our teams did, which I thought was just amazing, is that they went and talked to the religious leaders. Like in the camps, there are a number of different mosques throughout the camps. And what they did was get the mosques to broadcast our COVID messaging and about the risks of COVID through the loudspeakers. So I just thought that was like a really wonderful and innovative way to tackle, it's a very simple problem, but I think we can relate to that too.
Yeah, that's not something I would think about, but obviously if there's ways in place, if there's an ability to take advantage of systems that are already in place, why not? So speaking of innovations, do you have any recent innovations to WASH programming that maybe you can share with us beyond what you just shared?
Sure. I don't know the date of each one, but I find them innovative in nature, so I'll go with these ones. One of them is it's a biodegradable pee-poo bag. So in some kind of slum environments, it might be common to defecate into a bag and sling it onto the roof. It's kind of referred to as a flying toilet. I know it's not a good visual, but what Oxfam did was to develop a biodegradable bag that's designed to turn that into compost. So within a few weeks, it will kind of deal with this open defecation problem. Now that's only useful in certain contexts and in certain emergencies, but I find it interesting, simple solutions to big issues. Another one would be, it's called a urine diverter dry toilet. So I don't know how much people regularly know about latrines, but usually it just comes with one vault or one chamber. But this one has two. So it just basically means that one is in use, being filled up, and the other one is always drying out and then can be emptied out safely and be used indefinitely, because you're always switching back and forth between the two. And also that one doesn't smell, so that's another bonus. Then my favorite is, it's called a tiger worm toilet. Yeah, I love these kind of things. So basically it's like a latrine that contains a colony of tiger worms, and they compost the waste. So it's like worms compost in your compost now, but taking something that is usually disgusting and turning it into something that is useful, and it reduces the amount of buildup, and then it's also builds up slower in the actual latrine chamber, and it's easy to remove. It just comes out like dirt.
Wow, okay, those are really fascinating. Maybe it's just me, but I think those are really interesting innovations, and obviously taking into context where these WASH programs are taking place. Okay, I have one last question for you. What would you say is the most difficult challenge to WASH programming?
Okay. Well, from my standpoint, I would say that like every situation is different. So like we could build a latrine that is perfectly suited to an affected population, meets their needs, is culturally appropriate. But then when we go to build another, it might not be perfect. Like you always have to consult with people and talk to them about what their need is, and take that and modify your plans. So it's kind of funny, but you might propose a certain design in a proposal, and then you'll have to modify it if you want to be actually respectful and meet the needs of the people in the way that you really should.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, especially based on all of the context and nuances that you talked about earlier on. Great. Thanks so much, Zarya.
Thank you. So Atia, you mentioned earlier that World Toilet Day is coming up. So now that we've talked, I've talked way too much about WASH. Let's talk about how people can really get involved and like really contribute to our WASH programming.
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, World Toilet Day is on November 19th, and that's a yearly day that we recognized. And it's actually, I would say, one of our favorite days here at Oxfam Canada. This year, despite not being physically together in the office, we are hoping to engage our supporters across the country to raise $10,000, which would help us build 100 toilets or latrines. So raise raise $10,000 just by going to the bathroom. So the premise, Zarya, is that you sign up for the Pay to Pee challenge, and I think we'll share the link of how you can register in the chat box. And on World Toilet Day, you donate $2 every time you use the bathroom. So we learned today through conversation with you that toilets can be life-changing. So imagine if everyone donated $2 every time that they use the toilet, how many lives we could change. I think that's pretty powerful, and all the funds that we raise through Pay to Pee on World Toilet Day will go towards supporting our ongoing WASH programming, our sanitation and hygiene programs, like we talked about, Zarya. So I think you should definitely sign up for Pay to Pee, and maybe I'll even let you join my fundraising team. Okay, so that kind of brings us now into our Q&A portion of the program for the last few minutes of our session today. And I'm just going to open up the Q&A box to see what kinds of questions we got. And I also encourage people to continue adding some questions in there, either for myself or Zarya. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, Zarya, what is your favorite WASH-related infrastructure or gadget? Okay, cool. Yeah, what's your favorite WASH gadget is the question.
Okay. It might sound boring, but I actually quite like the hand washing station. So the Oxfam hand washing station. So it's like you can Google it to bring up an image of it, but basically it's very like low cost, easy to like construct, and then it uses like such a low amount of water. So it means that people don't have to travel far frequently to fill up their hand washing station. So it basically just has this little like copper piece, and you just push your hands underneath it and it gives you a small amount of water. So I think originally it was trialed in Nduta camp by our colleagues in Tanzania, but they were just so excited about it that it's definitely one of my favorites.
Ooh, I like that. That sounds great. somebody else is wondering how they can find out more about our WASH work. I think you covered a lot, but if they want to do a deeper dive, how can they find out more?
Sure. So I would go to oxfamwash.org. I think this is the most user-friendly way to look at like different topics. And so it will break down like you'll have water, and then there'll be subcategories under that, sanitation and hygiene. And you can look at some of our Sani tweaks and some of the innovations that I explained there.
Awesome, thank you. And it looks like we've shared that link in the chat box for those that are interested. I think we have time for maybe one more question if you're ready for it, Zaria. This one's for you as well.
Sure.
What's an interesting consideration you've learned through consulting with women and girls related to WASH work?
Okay, I would definitely say the ones either related to MHM or to privacy. Like I mentioned, for latrines in emergencies, especially at the beginning, often the type of latrine is made with either like wood or bamboo structure and then covered with like tarp-like material. So if you do have lighting in it, apparently this can become like a little bit blacklit. So what is private when there is no lighting inside, before you go in, and when you turn on the light, you can see like the outline sometimes of people. So one of the things that our WASH colleagues did was to just use better quality tarps so this doesn't happen, because it's really awkward. But I think important to make people feel super comfortable when they're going to the washroom.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously you wouldn't really catch that unless people were actually using the latrine. And it's great to hear that you can get that feedback and then adjust accordingly. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this month's Oxfam Live. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, and myself or Zaria would be happy to answer any of those questions. Thank you all for attending today. And Zaria, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this issue, on WASH work. And I also want to thank Caroline and Ellie, our colleagues here at Oxfam Canada, who have been helping us out behind the scenes and organized this Oxfam Live for November. My last plug is to remember to please sign up for Pay to Pee. Again, World Toilet Day is on November 19th, and this year we're aiming to build 100 toilets and raise $10,000 to do so. Thank you very much. Bye for now, and take care.